Hey, it's Bitty Penny. Welcome to my channel. Today it is time for Oh So Inspired, which is a collaboration, a group of people who get inspired by the same inspiration each month. This month we're focusing on Stamp with Lorraine, which Lorraine has a YouTube, a blog, an Instagram. Everything will be linked down in the description box as far as all the collaboration team, as well as for Lorraine. There's also a playlist that you can hit in the title of this video so that you can watch everything and see how everyone was inspired. These are the cards that I made this month, and I'm going to be sharing some styling tips, I guess is one way to put it, for things that I kept in mind as I was creating my cards this month. I am using some goodies that were sent to me in Happy Mail. This beautiful stamp set. I'm also using one sheet of each color of this paper that I'd gotten at Hobby Lobby a long time ago when they were having a clearance. I love buying their cardstock, especially when it's on sale like this one. So I decided I would use each sheet and make my cards today. So the white sheet I'm actually going to take and cut down, and I ended up cutting this to 4.5 by 6.5. That's not what you see me doing here, but I did trim it more afterwards. So my two white panels for 5 by 7 cards were cut to 4.5 by 6.5. And then I did a varying size for these strips. I cut them down to some of them to 1 inch, and then the darkest panel that I cut down, I cut to 1.5 inches. And then I cut them at 4.25. So that gave me 2 strips for each card. And then if I wanted to cut them down from there, I could. Okay, so I'm just cutting out my strips for each of my cards, and I even used the foil strip as well, which ended up being a silver foil, and I just thought it was so lovely. So I was inspired by Lorraine's just varying colors and strips of paper. This would be such a good inspiration for using your scraps, especially because most of the ones I'm using here are 1 inch strips, but they don't have to be. They could be 3/4 of an inch, they could be bigger, whatever you like. I did decide to do an embossed background. I got this embossing folder from my friend Desiree at Include a Thank You, which came in Happy Mail as well. So I'm using a lot of my Happy Mail today. Now, I did 2 different methods. At first, I took my ink pad to my embossing folder and I inked it up directly. You want to be careful about whatever ink you're using if you're using this method, because especially if it's like archival, it would stain your embossing folder. So this is a Distress Oxide, so it easily wipes clean. Any of Tim Holtz inks, like his Distress inks, would wipe off very easily. That wasn't giving me the look I was going for. But the great thing is there are 2 sides to every card, and I had done it on the side that wasn't raised. So now on this raised side, I can just rub my ink pad across the raised design and get this look. And I like actually the distressed look that I got between it. I took out a lot of my watercoloring, but basically what I had done was laid a base layer of color. Typically when you watercolor, you want to go in layers. And so I laid a base layer of color down, just 1 layer of pink, of blue, and that sea glass kind of green for the mason jar. And then I went back in and added darker layers. Watercolor always fades as it's drying, it dries back a lighter color. So go a little heavy, go a little darker. When you're painting, when you have your wet paint, just knowing that it will dry back to a lighter color. So this is how I colored up my images today. Love the way they came together. I did fussy cut them and I did a little editing there. I didn't feel like cutting around those leaves, so I just cut them off. And here is where I started kind of working with different ideas as far as styling or editing my card design, which I wanted to share with you guys. So I have my 4 strips of color here, and I have my focal point. Well, then I wanted to add a sentiment. I thought it would be fun and interesting to just add the sentiment to one of the colored strips. So I added it to the top to help balance out the card in general. Like I have a big focal point, I have, details in the background, and then by adding my sentiment at the top, it just helps the eye travel around the card. So I stamped that out twice, once for each card. And I will say that making 2 cards of the same style like simultaneously does help when you're trying to make decisions stylistically. So this looks good, but it was a little plain. One of the things I liked about Lorraine's blog post was how she was playing with the concept of a floating design. Now, all along I was planning on popping up my bouquet, and I will be doing that. So it'll be floating. But if you know me, you know I like layers, I like texture, I like throwing everything on my cards. So I was still wanting more. I toyed with adding this doily, but I just really felt like it was distracting and it didn't feel as unified as I wanted it to. So that was a no-go. So then I thought, well, what if I mat some patterned paper on some of these strips? So I picked 2 strips, the bottom strip and that second strip from the top as my 2. I used some stamps, and what's great about this is I'm getting to use my scraps from when I was cutting down my white cardstock for the embossed layer. So I'm just pulling out those strips. I'm not cutting any new paper. And because I'm using the same paper and the same ink, it's all going to coordinate, which will help soften the design overall. If you know me, you know I have a ton of patterned paper. I could have gone to my patterned paper, I could have gone to my scraps and looked for some, but I wanted everything to blend, to be unified in my design. So I didn't want to miss the opportunity of using a coordinating ink and paper to create my own kind of patterned paper to mat on these strips. So, that is one of the beautiful things about taking this approach is that I use the speckled egg distress oxide ink on my background, and now I'm able to use the same ink in the foreground, creating my own patterned paper, which just helps everything coordinate. You don't have to have Tim Holtz ink to do this. You could use any ink collection that you have. And that's the other beautiful thing about it is it's a concept for you to play with and with the supplies that you have in your stash. So I was just measuring up the strip so I could figure out what measurements to use so that it would be kind of framed there at the bottom. And I really liked that. I thought the polka dots was a little too much. And the way I determined that was because I had 2 cards side by side, and I had one with the polka dots and one without the polka dots. And this is where I think creating more than one card at a time, you can kind of play with different design concepts and different stylistic choices and compare them more easily versus if you ever get caught in like a little bit of decision fatigue as you're making one card and you're trying to make the right decision. I think it's a little easier if you have two very similar ones side by side. You can see what it would look like by changing your choices or editing your choices. So it really helped me in this instance to have both cards. Another thing I'm going to use are my gel pens, and I keep finding myself pulling these more and more often now. I stamped my image out in black ink, but I didn't want the greenery that is in this image to stay black. I wanted it to be green. So I pulled a color that coordinates again with my palette, and I'm just going over that black ink. I'm not drawing anything of my own. I'm just going over the black ink and making it green. So that is the power of a gel pen. Love them. And then here I'm just using my foam tape, my little foam squares, and popping up my focal pieces. So I hope that by sharing some of these different ideas, concepts, style choices, whatever you want to call it, I hope it helps you as you think about your next card project and variations that you could do in making yours. So I got everything glued together, threw a couple of gems that were silver on there to match that metallic paper. And I think they came together nicely. I love this sentiment, wishing you happiness, because I think it could go for like any occasion. Hop along, join the playlist. It'll play every video from the creative team, and I hope you enjoy it. See you next time. Bye.